So my talk today is about the relationship of science and religion. And I want to start with a piece about Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard was an anthropologist, and he was a Jesuit priest. He was one of the people, one of the team who found the Peking man. And he was way ahead of his time. He was kind of like an Einstein of spirituality. He talked about what he called the noosphere, which was this, he believed, this band of consciousness around the planet. And of course, he also then talked about the cosmic Christ, which is only now really gaining traction. And he did that at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. And so this is someone writing about him. He says, Teilhard's mystical journey began with an awareness of a subtle presence pervading the atmosphere in which he lived. Teilhard says, mysticism is a science that requires a sixth sense, one that opens to a dimension of the world that is available to all, yet not easily accessed by many. To practice this science is to learn to discern more than that which the eye can see, the ear can hear, the nose can smell, the tongue can taste, and the skin can feel. More than what our best scientific instruments can detect. So he lived in this, you could say, rarefied atmosphere in which he was aware of a presence that pervaded all things. And over the last several centuries, there has been continued attempts to pit science and religion against each other. Of course, very often there are true believers on both sides whose only approach is to try and discredit the other and to disprove the other. And in some sense, science has become like a religion, in that it has one fundamental belief that it adheres to and one practice, namely the scientific method. The absolutist view is, from a scientific perspective, that everything that ever was, is now, or will be, springs from the interaction of matter and energy, and nothing else. They believe that in time, the origins of life and the universe and the mystery of consciousness will be determined without the need of any resort to a divine being, or as one comic says, our imaginary friend. In many respects, this approach is an article of faith, and it is the credo from which scientists embrace scientific materialism. It's all just matter, it's all just energy. And if you as a scientist don't adhere to this in scientific circles, you may very well be excommunicated or shunned, like in the old-time religion. And so that's why, in a sense, it has started to act like a religion. But the belief that everything that was, is, and will be is only an interaction between matter and energy is a belief, and it's not a proven fact. Scientists use what is called the scientific method, which means that you have to prove something experimentally, and it has to be consistent over time, and it has to be replicated many times and by others. Yet, the interesting thing is they don't use this method to prove their claim that something other than energy and matter doesn't exist. They don't explore other possibilities, but claim definitively, without proof, that there is no other explanation. A very vocal group of scientists dismiss out of hand, or even hold in disdain, that there may be a non-material explanation for the universe. However, not all scientists are like that, and some are more open-minded. And there are quantum scientists that are open to the idea that consciousness might be what they call a quantum state of matter, something that's inbuilt into the matter. And in quantum physics, and I know this is a little heavy, I'll I'll move on from this, but I want to lay out the groundwork. In quantum physics, objects are waves of possibility that reside in a domain of reality called the domain of potentiality, where communication is instantaneous, without any signal, and is non-local, meaning it happens outside of space and time. It doesn't need space and time. Objects, you could say, are brought into existence through kind of a form of telepathy, is how I think of it. Consciousness puts its attention on something, imagines something, and the potential for its existence comes into play. The mind is like a mold into which it places an invisible substance or potential, and matter responds. Hence the old adage, mind over matter, you could say. And that is why it is possible to call consciousness a state of quantum physics, or a characteristic. Now, what is the crucial piece of the puzzle? It is the observer, the mind, the power of consciousness, or conscious mind. And that's really the main thing I want you to remember out of everything I've said so far. You can forget all the rest. What we know from quantum physics is that matter can behave as a particle, or it can behave as a wave. What determines its behavior? The fact that it's being observed. All matter, light, behaves as a field or a wave until it is observed, and then it behaves as a particle. I was just thinking of, like a child who's doing something, and it's doing it dancing maybe, and then suddenly it notices someone is looking, so it freezes. So it becomes a particle rather than the wave. That just popped into my head. And there have been famous experiments that have shown this to be true. Matter behaves differently when it's observed. Therefore, the cause of all of this material universe is that it is being observed by some consciousness, by some mind, what we would call the divine. Amit Goswami, and you may have seen him on KVIE, he has a couple of programs on there. He says there is no object in space-time without a consciousness looking at it, without a conscious subject, observer looking at it. And so this then is a spiritual principle or law. It would seem then that the key to religion or spirituality is to know that mind, to become familiar with the observer, to see as it sees, so that what is seen will behave according to the mind of its creator, or how it was meant to behave. If I look at the world from only a me, I perspective, then the cells of my body will resonate at that frequency. If instead I look at the world from a we or us perspective, then the cells of my body will react differently, and I will act accordingly, and my world is different. I won't be so fearful because I'm part of a bigger field with others. And if I look at the world from a divine human perspective, then I realize I am the divine human observer. I am that observer, and therefore I am the creator of the world, giving access to what we would say are healings and miracles and all sorts of things that we say are extraordinary, outside the ordinary. And if this becomes my operating principle, then I have discovered a science of religion. I have laws, I have practices. It's a science. I can do this, and I can replicate it, and I can share it with others, and they can do the exact same thing. Right? So what might that be? How would we access that? What is the experiment or the practice that I can undertake and share with others so that they can do what I'm doing? The answer that the great mystics, otherwise known as spiritual scientists, have found for themselves and shared with humanity is, drum roll, meditation. I know, that's not what you want to hear. But I'm going to digress for a minute and tell you about a very interesting experience that I had this past week. So last Monday morning, I had woken up early and I was lying in bed. And as Matt Kahn says, he likes to do meditation, and so do I. And all of a sudden, I went completely under. And I dropped into what was like a dream state. And it was really interesting. I was sitting over there, and there was a circle of people in front of me, about 20 people. And I was starting a meditation contemplation class. And people were just, talking and carrying on, and I'm trying to get the class started, and I'm getting frustrated. And I kind of looked down at the ground for a second, and I looked up, and the circle had doubled. Now there were like 40 people there, and they're carrying, it's like herding cats. I could not get them to, calm down. And then I kind of dropped my eyes again, and when I looked back up, now there were two people at two tables having lunch right behind them. And I got really frustrated, and suddenly, just like that, I was now over here. The group had gotten smaller, and the two tables had disappeared. And a voice spoke from behind me, through me, and said, "Contemplation, meditation, is looking into a mirror to see one's original face, created by, as, and for God." And my jaw dropped in the dream, as did everybody else's. Everybody just looked in shock. And I could feel this vibration, this wisdom, this oneness with this voice, this presence that spoke in this dream. That was so amazing and so powerful. And I knew in that moment that I was this being. This was part of me, but it was just buried. I was a particle of this amazing wave field, and I somehow dropped or was dropped into it. And my understanding completely changed in that moment. And even though I was sort of in a dream state, you know how that is, you can have all those feelings that are so real. It was an amazing experience, but I digress. Back to the practice, meditation. So you're probably underwhelmed by my mentioning that meditation is the key to unlocking the mystery of religion, spirituality, or the divine. I know, we would really like it to be something else, wouldn't we? Something easier, something that doesn't take so much concentration and isn't so time-consuming. The ego mind says, oh, well, that can't be it. It's too simple. And after all, it cuts me out of the equation, so therefore it can't be true. Yet, it seems to be true that all the saints and sages have used two techniques to become one with this creative and observing mind. And those two techniques are stillness and inner absorption. They could be said to be the core disciplines of the science of religion, which bring the practitioner into a transcendent and beyond sensory awareness. As we know, Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, spent hours in the silence, and he says he went to headquarters. Well, it sounds like I dropped into headquarters the other morning. Rumi once wrote a line of poetry which said, "Sit quietly and listen for a voice that will say, 'Be more silent. Die and be quiet.'" Paramahansa Yogananda once said, "Stillness is the altar of spirit." And we have to go to that place and put ourselves on that altar. And thousands of years ago, a psalmist wrote in Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God. Now this line has a double meaning to it. When we heard it first, perhaps, we thought that it referred to becoming still so that we can know the divine presence, the other. But over time, perhaps we have realized that there's a second meaning too. We can come to know that our deepest existence is in and as God. Be still and know I am God. I am part of this thing that we call God. Why do we need the stillness? Because our inner face is covered over with all sorts of masks and identities that we have collected and have become attached to. So that's why I started off this morning with a poem about the mirror. There's a maelstrom of thoughts and ideas and feelings and reactivity swirling around inside us. Noise, chatter, data. There's such a flood of it in our lives that we are overwhelmed by it, and it drowns out the more subtle communication that is possible, that points to a much deeper potential in us, that potential that I tapped into. The deeper reality is lost to us. The field and the wave is not experienced, and we see and know ourselves only as a particle. And that's pretty scary in this big universe, because we feel small, insignificant, tiny, vulnerable. What's this big universe going to do to us? And yet the saints and the sages teach that there are two intensities or types of input. There's pronounced and sensory, or there's subtle and transcendent. And in profound stillness, a sensory input recedes, and we naturally then become aware of transcendent realities that have always been present. When the noise dies down, we start to hear the silence. The more still one becomes, the more aware one becomes of these transcendent realities that are within us. That's the inner absorption. The silence has this way of absorbing us and of filling us, infilling us from within. We also know that the inner stillness can bring outer benefits, like relaxation, or letting go of emotional pain or tension, a sharpening of our mental clarity, a feeling of well-being, of connectedness, and a sense of peace. These are the observable and provable outcomes of the experiment of being in inner stillness or silence. This is what we can all experience together, we can replicate it, and we can share it with others. I was really struck this morning when I stopped to read the Daily Word, without looking at it before I'd written my talk. What was it about? It was about stillness and finding the self within. That's always a sign to me that, okay, you're on the right track here. And the other morning, I became aware of a very different reality going on in the depth of my being. Had I not taken the time to meditate, I wouldn't have fallen into the space of oneness and knowing. There truly is a world or universe within us that we have not yet explored. You know, we've gone to the moon, what do you do? We've sent rockets to wherever. But here is this universe and this space within us, and we haven't explored it. It's unknown to us. And I'm reminded of the Rumi poem that says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about." So we need to go into that field, to quiet the mind, to get out of the dualistic mind that's always obsessed with right or wrong, am I winning or losing, always judging myself or others. there's another place that we can go in consciousness, a center, a presence within ourselves, a place of observation that is holistic and whole-making, that helps us to be in the field of knowing that there is only one great soul here this morning and at all times, past, present, and future. It's always been the one same soul expressing itself, whether we were in the womb, whether we were a little baby, an infant, a teenager, in our 20s, or in our 90s. It's the one great soul expressing in all of these forms, and in all the forms that it takes. And so we have to learn to not allow ourselves to become so obsessed with the foreground that we fail to explore the background. Jesus put it this way: we must be in the world, but not of it. And that's real tricky, because the news and the media and the world is continually pulling us into its sad story and its crisis. We're continually being pulled away from this other place in us. And so we have to step back and become still, and then observe the world as the divine might see it. And that's a very different perspective than our usual limited viewpoint, in which so many things don't make sense to us, and in which so many things are scary and frightening. There really is only one presence and one power available to all of us if we can step out of the hurricane into the eye of the hurricane. If we can observe reality from that place and move beyond our own perceptions that we are a particle, instead of enjoying our lives in the wave. And the wave is moving. We don't have to be in control. We can just surf and go along for the ride. It's a field of love and of peace. The mystics, the saints, the sages of every era and religion, and all true spiritual scientists are all encouraging us to go where so few humans have ever gone, into the mystery and depth of ourselves. Have courage, be bold, and make the commitment to be still and know that I am is the divine presence within you. It is your true self and who you really are. Let us take these thoughts into a moment of meditation. And all it takes is a moment. As time and space fall away, and we are in non-local reality, meaning we are here and everywhere, because that is the ability of the divine consciousness, expansive, infinite. We can experience that right now. We can let go and simply drop to the depth of our being. We can sense this magnificent soul that is within us. Perhaps we can see its image in a mirror, in a likeness. And as we sit there in awe and wonder, we can know that all qualities that we would ascribe to this image are ours also. We have the likeness of this being. And so, for a moment, we know ourselves to be infinite, not bound by space or time. We are expansive. Our consciousness is always increasing and growing. We are eternal. We have just stepped into space and time momentarily, but we always have been and always will be eternal beings at our core. And above all, we are love. We are loving. We are lovable always. We have all the love we need within us. We let those thoughts sink into our being, into the cells of our bodies, into the very marrow of our bones. And so it is. Amen.